Um, all right, tonight we are going to move to get a little bit closer view of what's going on in some of the neighborhoods in Tallahassee. Last week, we got an overview of some things that are being done by the city and the county and FSU and FAMU, but this is going to give us a little bit more up close and personal, I hope. And our moderator tonight is Dr. Tisha Holmes, and she's an assistant professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Florida State University. Her research emphasizes active community participation in research, education, and decision-making processes to address the present and potential impact of climate change and environmental risks. She studies sea level rise adaptation in Florida and public health adaptation efforts to climate change. She has examined household perceptions, responses, and post-disaster recovery actions in rural communities in rural US South and the Caribbean. And we're also very pleased to claim her at Trinity as a former Trinity preschool parent. I think that gave us a little edge in getting her to come and work with us. And I do want to say before she starts that Tisha has been a tremendous help in planning this series, in coming with us last week and also offering to moderate and organize this week. So you're in for a real treat because she and her whole team have worked out just a marvelous evening tonight. And I'm really, really excited to hear what they have to say. So without taking up any more time from this, I'm going to hand it over to her. Tisha?
Thank you so much, Barbara, and Nick for inviting me to participate in this session. TUMP, which is the Trinity United Methodist Preschool, I will forever be an alumni, and Malia, my daughter, will ever be, you know, as we pass the church, we're like, that's my school. So forever Tumpers. So today, it's my pleasure to facilitate this roundtable discussion with our wonderful community leaders, right? Thanks to you guys for running this really important series of having these important conversations around the legacies, the historical legacies of race and their intersections with neighborhoods and planning and public policy, and thinking about, I think sort of like the ultimate goal here is to think about how we engage productively and form sort of pathways for reparative action to shape our vibrant neighborhoods in Tallahassee. So Barbara mentioned last week that Dr. Kim from FSU DERP presented on the role of things like zoning and planning in terms of creating segregated outcomes in renewal projects, in revitalization projects in neighborhoods, as well as the role of the CRA, CAC in giving communities a voice in the decision-making process. And John Baker from the Neighborhood Affairs introduced us to the Neighborhood First planning process and the public that sort of came out of the public safety initiative. So today, what we're going to be doing is speaking with community leaders that are part of the CRA boundaries or districts and the Neighborhood First process. They're engaging in the Neighborhood First process to hear their experiences and their perspectives in terms of not only participating in these projects, but living and being leaders in these communities that are affected by these processes. So to start us off, I'm going to welcome my esteemed and lovely friends and community leaders. Monet Moore is an urban planner and community advocate who's worked with PNA, which is the Providence Neighborhood Association, as an organizer for a number of years. She's coordinated special events, she's done grant making, and is also the author of the Sustainability Strategic Plan. She graduated from FSU for undergrad and then went to a school that shall not be named 3 hours away for her master's in planning. And then she moved to, she moved further south to work as a neighborhood planner at Sarasota County government. And she recently took a new position on what we call, but no sort of shade on the dark side in consulting, private consulting in the neighborhood planning division at Atkins. Ronnie Wright is the past president of Providence Neighborhood Association. Her active presidency took place at the time of when Obama began his presidency. Following her presidency, she remained an active part of Providence Neighborhood's leadership. She is currently part of the advocacy team for the neighborhood, working as a liaison for specific city departments, and she's also focused on expanding communications for the organization. And then Walter Mcdonald III, who has the nickname of the Special Sauce, is the current president of the Providence Neighborhood Association. He is a longtime prominent champion for Providence neighborhood and is really key to developing key stakeholder relationships to advance Providence's priorities and projects. He has a ton of partnerships and relationships with faith-based organizations like Trinity, Florida State University, the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, the School of Engineering, the School of Medicine, other sort of like K through 12 schools, private companies, and nonprofit foundations. And then we also have Rosa Ramos Morgan, who is a longtime resident of Tallahassee, who's worked in state government as a bureau chief at the Department of Community Affairs. And then she left to form her own consulting company focused on community development. Most recently, she served 2 terms as the board of directors of Sustainable Tallahassee, which is an organization you guys are probably familiar with, and the statewide Florida Prosperity Partnership. She was a co-facilitator of the social justice curriculum offered at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tallahassee, where she co-chairs the Black, Indigenous, and people of color group. So I think we have a very diverse group. We have the leaders from Providence Neighborhood Association, Rosa, who's worked with a number of communities in Tallahassee. And if Talithia joins, which, you know, she's a mom of 7 kids and she's doing a lot. She is the president of the Bond Neighborhood Association. If she's able to join us, I will introduce her then. But please join me in welcoming our esteemed roundtable. All right. So have I missed anything? Did I like cover it? Special sauce, right? I got everything. All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay. So, so let's start us off with talking about a bit about Providence neighborhood. And Rosa, you can talk about the neighborhoods that you've worked with. What are some of, first of all, what are some of the favorite things of Providence, and what are some of the issues and challenges that Providence faces? And Rosa, you can speak about any community that's sort of like one of your near and dear communities if you want to. Ronnie, you want to start us off?
I can, but unless Rosa wants to start.
Or Rosa can start?
Well, maybe I can start because I can give a little background to that. Many of you heard about the Neighborhood First plan when John Baker talked to you all, I guess, last week. And we kind of forget that that's not the first idea, that's not the first iteration of neighborhood planning and neighborhood revitalization. And I was involved in probably a more intensive effort, but with less funding, called the Urban Renaissance Partnership, that was formulated by the late Steve Meisberg, who was a city commissioner here in Tallahassee for many, many years. And he was really the one that brought together the idea that you do neighborhood revitalization by working within neighborhoods rather than having city staff come in and tell the neighborhoods what they should do or what they want. And also I realize now in hindsight, had the genius to partner with something that he termed the Covenant Partners, which was bringing based organizations into the Renaissance Partnership, which was a group of the Florida State University, FAMU, TCC, several banks, the county, the city, and the faith-based partnerships all came together to work on the concept of neighborhood revitalization. So it was from that original program, of which Providence was the second neighborhood that undertook that planning process, that led to the idea of the Neighborhood First project many, many, many years later. we're talking about Neighborhood Renaissance Partnership was in the early 2000s, 2010, somewhere around there. So there was a big gap between the time that the Renaissance Partnership Program kind of faded out, and we came to the table with city government with this quote new idea of neighborhood first programs. So the best thing that I can say as a lead into Providence is that they started with the Renaissance Partnership Program, and the neighborhood never stopped after that. They remained organized and focused on making their neighborhood a better place to live. And I think that they're an exemplary group where most organizations kind of fade out after a while. Providence has hung in there and has been committed to doing things right in their neighborhood.
That's really awesome. Thank you, Rosa. I think that really does bring to a great favorite is that one of the things that I've always loved about Providence Neighborhood Association and the neighborhood is that the leadership has been consistent. When I was asked to be president, I was given the plan. Here is what you are going to be presiding over. And this is what you need to do. And so if it wasn't in the book, if it wasn't in the plan, then it was something that we dealt with, but it wasn't a part of like our continuous focus. So I would say that having access to all of the presidents has been an amazing thing. Like once it's unlike other neighborhoods, sometimes there'll be like separations or people will have an argument and leave and things like that, but we just have not had that. Everyone has consistently bought into what our mission is, and so we've been working that. And that does, put a little bit of nervousness in doing something with a new process because this has worked so well. So what will that mean? I would also say that one of my other favorite things is finding out that a neighborhood that has a transient population, renters as opposed to owners, is not so transient after all. You see a lot of the same people in the neighborhood year after year. They may move from one house to another house, but they are still in the neighborhood, or they may move out of the neighborhood temporarily and then they come back. So a lot of times when people talk about what is it like to have, not a lot of owners, that is something that I found that there are a lot of familiar faces, even though there are not necessarily people who own and live in the space that they own. I think one of my downsides or drawbacks, I might have to come back to that one because I was thinking about all the good stuff, and then when I think about the not so great stuff, there are definitely little elements, but I think I want to share a specific one. So I'll pass it off to the next person, if that's okay.
No problem, no problem. Monet or Walter, you want to jump in? No one wants to talk about challenges. Interesting. Miss Moore.
So I'll just get started. I joined the Providence Neighborhood Association when I was in my undergraduate years at Florida State. I've been active in the Neighborhood Association for probably about the past 7 or so years. And I will state one of the challenges, because one of the challenges is something that I kind of joined and immediately jumped into trying to be a part of a solution for it. And I would say food insecurity. So one of my first roles within the Neighborhood Association was working with the local community garden, the Touch of Life Community Garden that's on Stuckey Avenue. And I say food insecurity is something that we struggle with or have struggled with because we have a large transient population. We have a large transportation disadvantage, meaning people don't have access to personal vehicles. But then also when you pair that with not having adequate grocery stores within walking distance, the Providence Neighborhood Association kind of came up with a solution on its own in regards to how can we provide healthy food to our residents at a low cost, and that was a community garden. So being able to see what those challenges are and then also having ways to try to address them as well has been a highlight of being a part of this group. So that's a good and a bad, but we're working it all out.
Fantastic. Okay, Walter? You want to add anything?
Yes, I do. First of all, I would like to thank Trinity for hosting us tonight. And also thank Trinity for being at the table with us. They have been with us since 2002 at the table. So I'd like to thank you all for being a partner with us. So everything we're talking about tonight definitely affects you, and you've been right there with us, and we'd like to thank you for that.
Great, fantastic. Okay, so
I do have mine now.
Oh, go ahead, Ronnie.
Okay, so it wasn't that I didn't want to talk about it. I was just trying to like tweak it. So the thing that I think is our disadvantage for me does have to do with communications. And it's that the expectation is that now that we have a lot of technology in the world, that it should be easier to share information and share things with people. But because our community has not advanced during the time between our plan and now, we're really pretty much stuck back in 2003. Most people have phones that don't have data. And so they are really linked back to the old days where you would just make a phone call. We have to go door to door to knock to speak to people. And so on one hand, it's face to face, which is an excellent way of doing community. But on the other hand, that's very labor intensive. So those are some of the challenges that we deal with, that the people are interested and wanting to be involved and connected, but it's very labor intensive for a small organization to invite hundreds of people personally. So that's my downside.
Right, right. So even if you're looking to sort of engage a group in a process or get their opinions, it's hard to get access to them and bring them to places, even if you weren't using sort of digital means, traditional methods, finding ways to bring them to the place where they are able to voice their concerns.
Right, but even in terms of just like a food donation, if you all, we're doing a food drive or we have something that we can do that's perishable and needs to get out within 24 hours, we may not be able to let everyone who would need to know that because of the way that technology works within our community.
Okay, so, and we may get into this in terms of like your project priorities. I mean, how have you guys figured out a way to navigate around that? Or have you?
Well, I think we are working on it. The way that we normally deal with it is that we do flyering. So, and it's actually it's a very costly process. And it's also, as we said, labor intensive. So when organizations come and do things in our neighborhood, we ask that they create a flyer or they create something that can be distributed so that, and that if they find out how many people they have to walk, because you need to put an invitation or a piece of paper on every single mailbox, on every single door, because of the way that we've decentralized. So like that is definitely important, but we also used to have like weekly staples where we would come together. Walter's dad's church would have the food giveaways each week. And so there would be a place where people would at least come once a week, but without having, with the church having had its issue, I don't know if everyone on the call knows, but there was damage to the Providence Baptist Church. Walter, did you want to speak about that at all? I don't want to overspeak on your stuff. Okay. So there was damage on the Providence Baptist Church, and the church has been brought down to the ground. So it's not actually there anymore. And they're in the process of re-permitting and rebuilding. And so, but we still use that space. The sign is still there. And so we still assemble and gather in different ways. Like, for example, tomorrow we will be having, well, it's not really ours. It's the city of Tallahassee is doing some information gathering, and it will be at the church. And so it will be with setups, outdoors, tents, sort of like what we did, Nick, with the event that we did, our movie night. So we're able to utilize that space. But yes, without centralized access or centralized place for people to come, then we have to have people in teams of 2 go door to door and deliver and make sure the word gets out. We also do our digital part by putting things on Facebook, but again, that is for a small portion of people who live in the neighborhood, and it also will connect more with our owners.
Right, I hear you. So you guys talked a little bit about and mentioned participating in the Neighborhood First process and the role of the Renaissance Plan and sort of starting from the Renaissance Plan to now. Let's talk about sort of the need for neighborhood plans and participating in processes, sort of long range planning processes like Neighborhood First. What are some of the driving factors you feel? And maybe Rosa, you can talk about this from a sort of longer arc perspective. What are some of the driving factors you feel sort of are channeling communities like Providence, like Bond, South City, Griffin Heights, Frenchtown why do you need a neighborhood plan, right? Why do these communities need to go through a neighborhood process? You want to start us off, Rosa? Or Walter? Walter wants to start us off.
That's a good question. Why do we have to have a neighborhood plan? I don't know if you know this or not, but only Black neighborhoods in the CRA have to have neighborhood plans. Why is that? Someone please answer that question. Everybody that's on this call tonight, they don't have a neighborhood plan. Only Black neighborhoods in the CRA have neighborhood plans.
So do you think that there's a value to having a neighborhood plan and participating in the longer range process? Or is it more procedural that in order to get funding, in order to identify your priorities, in order to demonstrate for the powers that be, that you've gone through the steps to show the need? There are some communities that have a higher tax base, that have more resources, that have political clout. That is not the case for a lot of communities in the South Side. And Dr. Kim talked about sort of like the segregation in Tallahassee that still exists, right? Even though it was historic, it continues to exist, right? So is the neighborhood plan sort of a means to an end? Or is it a useful living document that helps guide where communities want to end up in the future? Who wants to take that? Rosa, I see you are unmuted.
Sure, I'll start that off because I was the one last time that asked that question about why communities on the north side didn't have plans. I think personally, having worked in communities for many, many years, that universally it would be a good thing if all communities had neighborhood plans and had to identify what they wanted in their community and what they felt and perceived were their needs, and then were funded by local government accordingly. Because I think some of you will remember the big kerfuffle about the sidewalks being built up on Old Plantation Road, where the people that were residents there did not want the sidewalks. And the city was saying, oh, no, you have to have sidewalks, you're next on the list. And they were going, no, wait, we don't want them. So that's an interesting inverse to some of the things that the South Side communities are facing, because they've been on the list for sidewalks for a long time and have to do these plans in order to get simple things like bus stops, street lighting, sidewalks, traffic calming, all those kind of things that other neighborhoods can get without having to go through this lengthy community neighborhood planning process. So I think if it was equitable to everybody, I think that would be a good thing, because I think sometimes the city government does come into a neighborhood and say, this is what you all need, you're going to have this. And maybe our communities would be more invested in what happens and more tied to each other as communities if we did come together as neighborhoods and do that. And I do serve on the board of the Alliance for Tallahassee Neighborhoods, which is a group of in-town neighborhoods that are trying to preserve the characteristics of in-town neighborhoods. And we have seen that where those conversations amongst neighbors has been a really important thing in identifying where you want growth and development and where you do not want growth and development, and why you're trying to preserve your neighborhood and not just be perceived as a NIMBY, not in my backyard kind of a thing. So Walter makes a good point. Why do some neighborhoods have it and some don't? And it is now the vehicle for getting funding from the Community Redevelopment Agency is you have to go through this planning process in order to access any funding from the CRA, which is community redevelopment tax dollars.
Great, Rosa. Thank you for sort of contextualizing and framing it at a higher level. Monet, I think you are muted as well. Do you have something to say?
Yeah, I would just like to touch on what Ms. Morgan spoke on in regards to the need. And as a neighborhood planner, I see both sides of it. I see that neighborhood plans can be a process that brings neighborhoods together. I see that neighborhood plans can be a catalyst. Neighborhood plans can be used as a living document and a guiding document for what the goals of a specific neighborhood is. It's perfect when it functions the way it's intended to function. It could really be a process in which communities can decide how their neighborhood should look and what their goals are. So there is potential there. However, on the flip side of things, I've also seen the neighborhood first process kind of be a door that's not opening and not allowing resources to flow through. And even when I look back on our Renaissance plan, I don't know if everyone's read it, but there were so many great things that the neighborhoods wanted, but also some of them were basic things. Like we talked about wanting stormwater improvements. And this was a plan that was adopted by the City Commission in 2003. But then later you see that some of those stormwater improvements, some of those enclosed ditches, some of those sidewalks didn't come about or weren't funded until 2011 to 2015. So my question would be, or something that I often think about, especially for neighborhoods that are within the urban service area boundary, why do we have to go through this rigorous planning process in order to get funding for capital improvements that should be there and should be maintained based upon where they're located, based upon that there is funding set aside of that? And so when we talk about sidewalks, especially in neighborhoods that are near urban core, why are we having to go through a planning process for those type of things in a CU 18 and a CU 45 neighborhood with those higher densities? Those are supposed to be walkable neighborhoods.
Yeah, I want to echo that as well, what Monet is saying, because I feel like a lot of times it feels like we're pulling for scraps. So it's like everybody else gets normal sidewalks, normal roads, but we have to then put sidewalks and roads along with hopes and dreams. So that doesn't quite make sense for hopes and dreams. Like you can hope for a sidewalk. I mean, maybe you would want to hope for a technologically cool community center, but not hope for a sidewalk or a road, or a covered sewage. Like that doesn't quite make sense. So I think that's a problem with why all of it's bunched together. But I also wanted to say that once you do it, you shouldn't have to redo it. The problem that we had with ours when we originally did our plan is that we created it and then we were told there is no funding for it. So when funding was announced, it wasn't funding for plans, it was funding for the specific planning process. So our plan that existed from 2003 is now behind other neighborhoods that have gone through this new to them new process to definitely to I don't know, so I think Frenchtown and another neighborhood have gone through the planning process we went through, but other than that, other neighborhoods did not. And so they're doing planning for the first time. That's the first time getting together and making these decisions, but they in this new process have now received funding before we have. And that's really, really hard for a lot of people who worked through the first process to sort of digest. Why is that the case? If we still don't have items on the plan, why are we redoing a planning process when these items have not been checked off? What is the purpose of restating that these items haven't been done? So I think that's hard. And so what I would say is that what was supposed to happen was that the city was supposed to check in with us annually regarding our plan and keep up and help us with that. And they didn't, but we continued to just work the plan. And so the fact that the city did not do their part of the bargain, which is to help us to maintain the plan with planners and talk about things, we could have been ready for money to drop, but that's not what happened.
Okay, so let's keep this discussion going around sort of identifying what your priorities were, implementing projects, priority projects. How have you guys been doing that, right? In the context of the Renaissance Plan and then now the Neighborhood First initiative. Can you give us a sense? Because as you said, different communities are at different stages, right? Like Griffin Heights, this is their first planning process. Frenchtown has gone through several iterations of different planning processes. Providence had already had their plan, went through sort of a bottom-up generation of their own plan, and now entering this sort of top-down structure of creating a planning process. So where are you guys at in terms of identifying your priorities, your goals, and implementing those projects? And how does that intersect with what's going on with NFI?
I would say that honestly, our priorities have not changed. I would say that some things could be adjusted and modified, but the basics of it has not changed. So I'll give you an example. In one of our crime issues, there was a problem that was explicitly stated that we wanted to make sure that dog fighting stopped. Because you all remember back when there was all of the dog fighting, and that was a very popular thing. Well, that is no longer a popular thing, at least in this area in Florida, in Tallahassee. I mean, not in the city. And so that's no longer a priority for us. But we do have young folks, similar age, who are riding their motorbikes up and down the road at 3 o'clock in the morning. So, I mean, there is that element of there is a nuisance that is occurring that is outside of the regular purview of the police department, and we need assistance in order to deal with that. So that is something that needs to be adjusted, or there needs to be a structure sort of put together to assist with. Now we see that it's not just a single item, it is a type of item. It is not one action, it is young people who don't have much to do, who are trying to entertain themselves. What can we do with that element in our plan? So I think that those are like the minor adjustments, but when you have things like we want sidewalks to be completed in all our areas, and we were told that that the city can't acquire easement for certain sidewalks. They can't acquire easement for sidewalks, but they can acquire an entire they can acquire a lot. They can acquire a lot of things when they truly need to, I guess is the best way to put that. So yeah, 100% completion for sidewalks would be great. It still hasn't happened yet. Right. So sort of starting with the low-hanging fruit, the obvious things, the primary things that have been identified for a really long time, and then working up from there. Yeah, go ahead, Ronnie. I was going to say, well, I think the thing is that the plan was actually really comprehensive. And I think that's why it's hard to say, what are your priorities? What I would like out of a new planning process is a way in which we can lift the boat all at once. What is the way in which we can do this piece, then this piece, then this piece that will let all of it happen, together? Because the problem has been that we have done certain elements successfully, but then not be able to sustain it because the next piece wasn't done. So like we got a community center, but the community center isn't available to us. It hasn't been available to us for like a year during the pandemic. It's closed to Providence Neighborhood Association. But so then we lose all of the programs and all of the opportunities that we had before. So you get something and then it goes back, and you get something else and it goes back. So I think through this new planning process, it's not, I think the wrong thing to do would be to pick items that are more important than others. It would be to see the entire project and figure out what is the pathway to the success of the entire piece. Great. So more integrated, am I still muted? It says I'm muted. A more comprehensive integrated approach. Okay. I want to give Talicia a little bit of time. She's joined us. Talicia, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I'm sorry that I'm wrapping up an event, but my camera's not on, but I can hear.
No problem. So I'm going to give you a little bit of embarrassment right now and just introduce you very quickly. Talithia, as I said before, is a wife and a mother of 7, turned community leader and advocate. She's had a long track record of serving in the Tallahassee community and in the state of Florida. She's currently the president and founder of the Greater Bond Neighborhood Association. And she's created a ton of programs like Breakfast in the Park, a youth literacy fund, community walks, and family health days. And she was also named City of Tallahassee 2016 Neighbor of the Year. So welcome. I'm glad you were able to make it. I think I'm going to wrap all of our questions. And if you want to sort of talk about the bond process, right? Talk about bond as a community, you know, sort of what are the issues and challenges that bond is facing really quickly. And then sort of talk about how you guys went about this process, because we have different types of ways. We have different communities, different residents, different needs and priorities, and the ways that they go about sort of advocating for themselves and engaging in the planning process. So tell us a little bit about bond.
Yes, so Greater Bond Neighborhood Association wrote its neighborhood first plan. It was adopted in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, December 2018. However, we were a very young neighborhood, recently formed association 2016. We had identified neighborhood priorities before we created our plan. We began to see the development happening around us, and we knew that development can be good or bad, right? So how do we get ahead of this development? And of course, as a community and residents in a low income area, we really didn't understand the process, but we knew we needed to do some kind of sector planning. And so we kept engaging the city about sector planning as it
Talithia, can you hear us? You are going out a little bit. And going out completely.
That's why we advocate for internet nets over the South Side, just so you know. This is why.
This is why. This is why.
We have a hard time with
it's rough.
internet.
It's rough. If you don't have like a hotspot, right? Talithia, can you hear us? Yeah. Okay. All right. So when Talithia, or if she's able to reconnect, we'll bring her back in. She's going to try and reconnect. So maybe we can pivot to sort of talking about, because it's almost 7:15, we want to sort of get through all of our discussion questions. Maybe we can talk about recommendations or sort of.
My bad.
Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Talithia.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to
that
tell
position.
the 45 version of this story. But so in a nutshell, we had identified priorities, and our priority areas in our neighborhood was economic development, land use, beautification, and public safety. And we began the neighborhood first process, which was not a process at all at that time. And we began to go through our what we had identified as community concerns and begin to put together what we thought were remedies to some of these issues in our neighborhood, which included affordable housing, public safety, so crime and prevention, economic development, the old housing stock that was in the neighborhood. And we created this entire plan, and we submitted it to our city commission and the CRA, who adopted that plan and then funded that plan at the tune of investment of $6.4 million that was supposed to be used to actually implement the plan. And so, yeah, I'll stop there because I'm pretty sure we'll dive into the differences and maybe the barriers and the difficulties experienced as we're implementing the plan.
Fantastic. Great segue, because that's exactly where we're at. We're going to talk about sort of the challenges and the opportunities for implementing plans and sort of like lessons learned for communities that may not necessarily either be included in the CRA or part of this NFI process yet, what are sort of the takeaway lessons and advice that you would give for communities to engage with before they embark on a process like this? Walter, you want to take a shot at it first?
Repeat the question, please, one more time.
I knew you were listening. So I'm asking just sort of the challenges, right? Like, how do you navigate those challenges, and what advice would you give to communities that want to, even though, certain communities are required to do this process and certain communities are not, for those that are required to do this process to get money, right? What are some of sort of your takeaways, advice that you would give to them, learning lessons that you take away from this process?
Each individual neighborhood is different than each individual neighborhood is in themselves. No neighborhood is the same. And in this process, it's almost like a cookie cutter process. So each neighborhood needs to stand up for themselves and know what they want and stay focused to make sure they get what they want. Don't allow the cookie cutter to swipe them up.
I hear you. So sort of adapting. Okay, go ahead.
Right.
Sorry.
Those 5 things that she mentioned in the bond plan, the city is trying to put in every plan. Well, that doesn't fit every neighborhood. Every neighborhood is different. Bond and Providence, even though we're next door, we both have totally different needs.
Very true. Very true.
You want to go ahead with that?
Yeah, and I think Walter is spot on, right? In all transparency, when I found out that Providence was next to, let's maybe Walter have already said this, but let's get the record straight. Providence is like one of the oldest neighborhoods in this neighborhood. For those of us who are working through the neighborhood first process, they already had a plan, okay, a Renaissance plan. They went through this. We actually looked at their plan when we started writing our plan, and we didn't mimic anything because, as he said, we are all so different. I mean, as different as day is from night. And one of the things that I advise, and not in a negative way, but in a very, because we are neighboring, we call ourselves sister neighborhoods. And I said to him as he began to go through this process, make sure that you know exactly what you want, right? Like, advocate for that. Read every document. Make sure that what's written in your plan is exactly what you said and nothing is added. Because, I mean, through the process, you realize that communities like ours, this isn't a normal everyday process that we go through. So individuals who are working out maybe very well-meaning tend to add in those what they call best practices and what they think works well or what they think the community needs that ends up not translating sometimes very well into what it is that we actually want. So I think that the neighborhood first process, it cannot be cookie cutter. While you try to take, you try to standardize the process, we are all very different. We have different priorities. We have different characteristics. We have, one of the things that I really admire about Providence is that they actually know in order of priority, right? Well, we had this blanket list of priorities and we could, essentially start anywhere. We probably should have prioritized our priorities so that we knew where to focus in on, where we would have the greatest impact. Took the time to think about how we would leverage funds. So those are some of, I think, the inequities when you're starting from a disadvantage with information and education wise when working through a process like this.
Great, Talicia. Ronnie, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna add in that I feel like one of the problems that we have is, like I was mentioning earlier, you have the plan, but then you also have the other things that you have to do within the neighborhood, like just being a neighborhood and focusing. Providence spends a lot of time dealing with major city decisions that are very quick and to make us, that we have to literally react to. There is no plan, like for all of the plan that we have that is on paper, no one comes to us and says, hey, we're thinking about this and we saw that that is included in your plan. It's always after the fact, it's always something. And so it's as if we made something and nobody actually bothered. It was an exercise. It feels like almost, except for the fact that we actually use it. And so this idea that the plan has focuses and it has stuff, like even now we just kind of have to refocus what our priority is based on what's happening in the world. And so right now, I feel like one of the things we're focused on is the issue of gentrification, because we are right next to FSU, because we are CU 45 and CU 18, even though what that means is that there's 45 and 18 per whatever. Every house in our neighborhood is a one house on 150 by 75. So we are RP1 essentially that is slated to be turned into 45.
Yeah.
So this idea that our community, our neighborhood is just like, we are really concerned about what happens when people just buy up stuff, when we don't have any connection to this idea of creating affordable housing. Where's the affordable housing that's going into our area? When we ask about it, when we advocate for it, it's as if we never said anything. So these types of things, that's one of the things that I think is being forced as one of our priorities, even though we would like to work on maybe other things. But we are absolutely looking at how do we deal with making sure people stay housed and that we have our community, because it is very easy for somebody to come through, strip it out, and turn it into whatever it is they want.
Yeah. And that's what you deal with when you're a community like ours, right? Because we don't have the resources to own and buy up all of our own land or property, right? So even in our area, we have all of these city-owned lots. And it's not until I'm studying, which takes so much other time, I don't even talk about the amount of study time that goes into really understanding all of this. But until I'm looking at other communities that mirror ours and seeing what communities are doing with public owned land, how do we create a sense of equity, and how can I get this property back to ownership for me? When I say me, I mean community, so that we're doing what the community wants. Or how do we parcel off and sell this property and then reinvest the funds back into the community to do the things that we want to do? So we have the direct opposite of being listened to. People just took our plan and they say, oh yeah, this fits in your plan. Absolutely not. We don't want that, right? So you have to remind people over and over that this may seem like it fits your plan, but what you're trying to do doesn't fit us. And that tends to be, but the plan says here, right? They're trying to force the circle in the square, because affordable housing, these blanket things, economic development, public safety, whatever, are listed, and individuals come and they have these siloed ideas that they now want to benefit from the funds that have been allotted in your area to do things that they want to do that is not a large community benefit to it. And so I'm realizing now that we can't all the way ward off some of this gentrification, as we say it, or development that's actually happening, but how do we now get in on, what's happening? Okay, if this development is coming, how do we create community benefit agreements? What do we talk about? Hey, you business, you're building a hotel, we need you to hire 20% of your employees to come from the community. Why? Because we're transient, we walk, we don't have cars, so I can walk to work right here. So 20%, if not more, minimum 20% needs to come from this neighborhood. We're asking that you reinvest 1 to 3% of your revenue back into the community. Create a scholarship or an exposure access fund or something. I don't know. Let's talk about that. We deal with a lot of transientness and homelessness. Can you donate, you big development property? Can you donate 1 or 2 of your units for public use, right? I've housed mothers, single mothers, with children sleeping in their cars out of my own pocket? What if we had in these big developments a unit that was set aside specifically for community benefit, that would, the cost was absorbed by the developer? These are things that we need in our community that, to me, would make sense, because I've realized that we're not going to stop these projects. They're going to come, they're going to keep coming, they're going to, they're going to happen. But how do we make them work in relation to what we want to see and things that are beneficial for our own communities?
Really, really great perspectives and powerful questions, both Ronnie and Talicia. So I think at 7:25, we're running out of time a little bit, but I want to give Monet a chance to sort of share her thoughts, as well as Rosa and Walter, if you want to talk about this a little bit too, in terms of, okay, so we understand what the situation is. We can't stop these projects. These are sort of like the outcomes. What are the ways that we can embed equitable outcomes in these decisions? And in what's the role of an ally? Monet, if you want to sort of speak to what you wanted to say, but how do you sort of like position yourselves as allies, Monet, Rosa, and then just broader for Trinity as a faith-based organization? What's the role of outside organizations in advancing or sort of pushing for more equitable solutions? Or you can, what you want to talk about, Monet, go ahead.
No, I'll go ahead and get started. I usually like other people to go before me, but I'm totally fine. So I think the role of an ally is being that support, coming in and just not taking over in neighborhoods, but doing what neighborhoods need. And also in that process, you have to learn the neighborhood and know what their individual needs are. And I think sometimes it's just, as you could say, like socially disadvantaged neighborhoods or neighborhoods that don't have that tax base, don't have that political power. Sometimes we need assistance in just advocating for ourselves, because we have the knowledge and we have an ideal of what we want to fix, but sometimes we really aren't just being listened to. So I think allies can kind of come in and kind of help that, push the things a little bit further, make sure that what we want to get noticed is being noticed. Additionally, I'll say, for the Providence Neighborhood Association, we always call ourselves to be putting out fires, but also one of our main roles is increasing the quality of life. We do a lot of food giveaways that we need volunteers for. We do a lot of street cleanups that we need volunteers for. We have a community garden that needs maintenance. So coming in and kind of helping pick up where some of that slack is, and either whether that be through time, whether that be through money, whether that just be through your voice at city commission meetings, but just being present.
Great. Rosa, you have anything to add to what we just discussed, or your perspectives on being an ally?
Thanks, Monet. I think that was very much on point. I think one of the things that we often forget is that people that live in neighborhoods have jobs and children and teacher meetings and trying to make rent and all those other things of life. And you don't always have a lot of time to do volunteer work. You don't always have a lot of time to do the legwork on an issue that probably needs to be done in order to adequately advocate for the neighborhoods themselves. One of the things that Talitha made me think of was that using community redevelopment agency funding, there's nothing in the statute, and it's governed by a Florida statute. There's nothing in the statute that prohibits a development when it's being built for housing to be able to set aside below market rate rental housing. And that could be subsidized through CRA money. There's been a number of times that some of us have gone to the CRA and have asked for that and have just kind of been brushed off. That is an innovative way to get mixed income housing without trying to fight the monolith of a big housing development coming in. I have to say, and I'm among friends, but I've said this to each and every city commissioner and the mayor, City of Tallahassee does not know how to do affordable housing. They don't. They do not have a clue. And so anybody that has that expertise or that can advocate for it is certainly something that's contributing as an ally to the neighborhoods. There are fabulous projects and programs across the United States that have incorporated mixed income housing, low income housing, where you drive through the neighborhood and you would never be able to tell which row of apartments was lower income, below market rate, etc. So there's a lot of things that we can do as far as supporting neighborhoods with information, with research, with doing some of that legwork that we've been asked to do by the neighborhood's leadership, and then coming back with it. The biggest piece of that is that if you go down to the Renaissance Center on Macomb Street, where you pay your light bill, or where you get your utilities turned on, across the street is the most egregious example of using zoning in order to displace a residential neighborhood. The people that live on the street beside that 5-story luxury student housing apartment complex that was built there never see the sunlight because of this big facade, this brick facade wall there. So that's something that, working with the city could have prevented that from happening, even though it was zoned appropriately, because they actually sold a piece of city land to the developer in order to make that project happen. But for the sale of that city property, the project was not going to be financially viable because it was the most important piece on the front of that street. So there's lots of ways in learning from the neighborhood what the issues are, and then thinking, okay, what is my expertise? Where can I plug in that? Maybe I can help in the community garden. Maybe I have some legal expertise and I can run this down and research it. Maybe I can get together a group of people that want to go to the CRA meeting and talk about a particular issue. Those are some of the least well-attended public meetings in our city, is the Community Redevelopment Agency meetings. They're open to the public, anybody can go. And it's something that not very many people understand about how those tax dollars work, but it has a big impact on the neighborhoods that we're looking at, in the neighborhoods on the south side.
Retweet everything you just said, Rosa. Very, very, very true. So we are at 7:32. We started a little late, so I'm going to squeeze out like 3 more minutes to give Ronnie, Walter, and Talithia the floor, and just say, we talked about a lot of issues here, and you've seen that it is a very complex dynamic that's going on from the city side as well as from the community side. But to give you guys the floor in terms of any last words that you want to share. Walter.
I'm going to go back to ally real quick. Trinity United has been our ally. And when I say that, when you really think of a person, I think of Laura Chapman. Laura Chapman has been there for us in your stead. She's helped with the garden. She's helped with Fun Day. She's gone to city commissions meetings for us. She's gone to CRA meetings. So Trinity has been our ally. And once again, thank you.
Oh yeah, she buys books too. She mail them in the mail to the children. I live in Bond. She mails my kids books. I think the thing that I would add to this whole process, you've heard us speak, right? And it's very complex. It is not cut and dry as a community identifies its own issues and writes a plan, and that plan perfectly gets implemented. There are so many intricacies. We cannot ignore systematic and structural racism that is embedded in any system, no matter how much they're trying to work with communities like ours, right? There are policies and structures and mindsets and biases that come along with these things. I think when you talk about being an ally is coming alongside of us. We know what our issues are. We know or have a sense of knowing what the solutions are and how do we get there. We just don't have the resources, right? We don't have sometimes the manpower or the bandwidth. We are communities who are, for lack of a better words, on fire. So allies not only just come with buckets of water throwing wildly at the fires that are happening, but really understanding what the causes of that fire, and what's in your bucket. Sometimes it can be alcohol, and it is, exacerbating the fire that's currently there. And so it's listening to those of us who are there and understanding that we're saying no or we're fighting back is because something doesn't feel right. It's not what we're asking for, and it's not that we're ungrateful or angry. It's that we're not feeling heard. And so I think being a good ally is listening, not just listening just to say I heard, but listening intently to figure out how do I fit in constructively into this situation. And so I appreciate you all for this talk. I think this is a part of allyship, hearing us and figuring out what are the next steps, where do you fit in. One of the ways very quickly you can get involved in the Bond community, we're hosting a Bond Festival October 23rd. We're looking for volunteers. We're doing some art projects that's coming up. So some fun stuff, I think that is not as heavy as our food insecurity and housing burden that you all can get involved in. But again, thank you for just taking the initiative to want to hear how can you better help communities like ours. And so I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, we really are grateful that you all are doing this type of an event this evening, asking good questions, looking for solutions, and understanding that I think you already are primed to be listening, which is why you are having the format. I do want to say, be careful who you listen to, because there are a lot of people who speak for us, speak on behalf of us, speak about us, but really don't know us. And I've seen that happen several times with leaders or higher up levels within government. And we have our own face page, we have an email, and we are here all the time to answer any questions. We've had several times where the city or some organization has said, well, we didn't know how to get in touch with you. Our email hasn't changed. Our Facebook page hasn't changed. So we're here. So if you do have any questions, please contact us. We have several people who are actually looking at the emails as they come through. We try to make sure that we're engaged. And if you'd like to be engaged, Monet did put that in the chat, but we do have Friends of Providence. That's part of our people who want to be involved, but who are not necessarily feel like they want to be a leader, or like they feel like they're not invested in enough. We're really looking to expand what people who want to be our allies, people who want to help us organize, we're looking to expand that, and we're calling that Friends of Providence. So if you're interested in doing some direct work with us, email us and let us know, and we'll get you involved. Because we were talking at the beginning before some of you came, Providence just we got a grant from a national company. We were one of 27 people to receive this grant, and with the $1,000 that we got, we leveraged it to some other support, and we were able to do a movie night. And Pastor Nick was there with his sons, and probably could speak to it a little bit. But the point is that we did it once, and because the grant allowed us to purchase, which sometimes grants don't allow you, you have to have disposable items with grants. Ours allowed us to purchase. We now have a projector and a screen, and we're looking to do more. It costs money to show movies. It's at least $250 to show a movie. So if you'd like to sponsor or put together two people, we'll be happy to do a banner and, thank you all for your sponsorship, because we'd like to do more of that community building. So those are the types of things we're working on. And we also are having a celebration for Providence in October. So we'll put more information out about that as it comes forward.
Great. All right, so we have covered a lot to digest, a lot to think about. So I want to open the floor to any quick questions because I want to be respectful to anyone's time, but quite frankly, I can stay here the whole night with you guys. But if anybody has questions, let's open the floor to our audience. And I can do the instructor stare to just look at you guys and see if you have any questions.
If you sit quietly long enough, Tisha, we'll talk.
Somebody will talk.
We will have to speak. Bill,
I think Bill has a question.
I'm relatively new to Tallahassee, and you talk about these neighborhoods. I've heard a little bit about the Bond and Frenchtown and Providence. Is there, I guess, maybe a map that helps show the outline of where these neighborhoods are located? I mean, to me, that's just kind of basic information that I have no concept when you talk about these communities about what part of town you're talking about and whether or not I've ever been in that part of town. Is there a source, any kind of a resource that helps me to define that? You mentioned the Providence Neighborhood Association site on Facebook, and I intend to go there and see what I can pick up from that. But there's also these other neighborhoods. How do I learn about them?
Sorry about that. Rosa, you want to take that question as sort of like the Alliance of Tallahassee Neighborhoods?
Well, there are definitely several maps. The City of Tallahassee Neighborhood Services has a good map of neighborhoods. So you can get an idea of what neighborhood is where by going there to tallagov.com and then clicking on the neighborhood services link would be one resource.
And then I think Monet, thank you, Monet, also put in the link to the Arcgis Maps where you're able to see these neighborhoods, and you'll kind of see that there's a spatial organization to where these neighborhoods are located based on roads and railroads. So there's a legacy that's attached to that. A lot of these neighborhoods are on the south side of a lot of main roads.
Interestingly, Providence was the first platted subdivision in the city of Tallahassee.
Mm-hmm. So we encourage you to, check it out and check out the Facebook page. And Talithia, if there are any sort of websites for Bond, we can share those. We've also made available the plans for all of these communities so you can get a sense of where they're located, not necessarily in relation to each other, but sort of what their priorities are, what projects they have going on, where they want to go. So you can definitely check out those links. I'm not sure, Barbara, where those are located for you guys, but they are available as well.
The link was sent with the link to the Zoom in this week's email.
Okay.
So if you go back and look at that, the link to all those neighborhood plans, and I would really encourage you, the history of the neighborhoods and why they are where they are and what makes them unique is really, really interesting. And it casts a lot of light on what's going on now. And, it just gives you some insight into what's going on in Tallahassee, especially if you didn't grow up here. So these aren't familiar places to you. It really is, it's worth reading. It really is. And you can tell people worked very hard on it and lots of pictures, which is helpful.
Yep.
But they have very good maps in those reports. Again, not so much as neighborhoods in relation to each other, but specific neighborhoods.
I wanted to add, Bill, if you use, do you use apps and things like that? Because there's an app called Nextdoor, and it's not all correct on there, but there are ways that you can see where there are boundaries of different neighborhoods, and you can start to associate the names with the sort of locations. You can also, when anyone speaks in next door, their neighborhood goes along with what they're saying when they're making comments. So you can kind of see some of the trends of what people are talking about or communicating about. So I know some neighborhoods use Nextdoor and some do not, but everyone is in Nextdoor, whether you like it or not, because your house is listed and everyone is just sort of there, and your name and your address and everything won't be said if you're not there. So if you're speaking, there'll be a little dot that's red, but not every single time you speak. The people can't track you where you live. But I'm just saying, there are ways in which you can get more of a feel for what types of issues people have and where people are if you maybe look at that app.
Okay, great. I feel I'm getting a couple of chats in here. Mr. Pat, did you have a question? And Mrs. Patricia.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
There's Pat Beavis, there's Patricia, there's Pat. I'm sorry.
This is a really probably so basic, I should maybe know this, but when you write the plans for the neighborhoods and they're submitted, is there any effort that's made when funding is decided upon to like make a reparation, to look at a plan and say, hey, this area, we never even finished their sidewalks, so let's fund that? Or does everybody just get a certain amount of money, whether they're trying to build a palace or they're trying to have sidewalks? How does that work? Is there anything to look at? This neighborhood really needs the sewage things covered and the sidewalks finished, and to try to make reparation for the neighborhood. Or how's it decided?
Not an obvious or basic question at all.
No, I don't think so. And I would say that it's tough to say, because I know that when I think it's Benton Hills perhaps is getting, they asked for one thing, I think maybe street or whatever, and they're like, oh, well, while we're there, we're also gonna do utilities and sidewalk and da da da. So while we're in there, we're just gonna do it all. So there are other people who probably needed each of those different elements, but the decision was made to do it all.
So is it a political decision, like with that committee that decides that?
Honestly, all I can speak to is the fact that when we were on the list for sidewalks and we were going to be removed, someone called me and said, they're trying to kick you off the sidewalk list. So then we went and we were like, why are you kicking us? Well, you guys don't need them. Luckily, someone did a study, some FSU student did a study in her own life about how many people were walking up and down the sidewalk and actually had that. It was something that somebody knew about. We took it, got back on the sidewalk list, and then they did our sidewalks and did 70% of them. So, I don't know if it's political. I don't know if it's convenience. I don't know if it's purchase price. I just know that without having an advocate, it makes it even harder to get your stuff done.
Okay, thank you.
And also in that same vein, even though these plans have been written or in the process of being written, or have had millions of dollars committed to them as bond has, that could change with the next election. There is nothing encoded that says the local government has to fund these plans. This is just something the current sitting city commission and sitting Community Redevelopment Agency board have decided to commit to fund. But with a shift in elected officials, that could also change.
Even if they've told you that it's being funded?
They told us they were gonna look at our plan each year. We never saw
That's
them.
true. That's true.
So that's where allies come in when Ronnie picks up the phone and goes, hey, they're trying to kick us off the sidewalks, you know?
Right.
Right. So there's a lot of work to do. And it is a constant fight. So we are getting close to 8. We really appreciate you guys coming out and spending time with us to hear this, what I think, quite frankly, is a really important and fruitful and just like real talk discussion about the issues, right? Gotta add a clap.
Thank you.
Right? So I just, sort of want to wrap up with just thanking our amazing and committed, and from the Caribbean, we call you best community leaders, right? For just all of your tireless work and your commitment to standing by your communities and standing by your residents. And I just also like to thank Trinity for actually stepping in the lane to ask these questions and trying to understand like what's going on here and how can we, sort of intervene or intersect or support. So, this is an ongoing conversation. We're hearing different perspectives. And, I think if we sort of keep in mind the broader goal of what we want is sort of more equity, more vibrant communities, more diverse communities, more livable places. I think eventually the partnerships and the trust and sort of the strategies, initiatives, and innovations will coincide with each other so that we can get on to the right path. So that's all we have today, folks, as
Well,
Doc said.
Trisha and
thank you,
Ronnie
Barbara.
and
Thank you guys
Rosa
for being
and
here.
Monet and Walter and Talithia, thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about. You've given us some things to do, I think, and you've certainly made us more aware, and we appreciate your honesty and your frankness. And we're so glad that you came tonight, and I hope we see you out in the community and can maybe be standing alongside you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We hope we see many of you again next week. We're going to look at Trinity's kind of history in the role of race relations and where the United Methodist Church is today and where they're going. And Letitia Scrivens, Reverend Scrivens, is going to be with us from New Life United Methodist, and she's going to give us some insights into that. So hope we see you next week. And again, everyone on the panel, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Marvelous.
Thank you.
Great. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.